Dear students, dear honored guests, dear colleagues, welcome to the next event of the Open Lecture Series as part of the Design Methodology course for the second year students, which was organized by the Department of Public Building Design. And first of all, thank for the supporters circle of the department for making this event possible. It's my great pleasure to welcome Fergus Feilden, who joins us from London today. In recent years, we have had the privilege to host exceptional architects from Transylvania, from Catalonia, from Vorarlberg, and from Slovenia. And today we continue this important initiative. And now let us shortly introduce Fergus before the lecture. Alongside Edmund Fowles, Fergus is the co-founder of Feilden Fowles. In about 15 years, the working community formed around them became one of the most innovative and respected architectural practices in the United Kingdom. Although they are considered a relatively young, evolving practice, the portfolio reveals a highly mature body of work with projects that beautifully build upon one another. When looking at their work, a deep respect for craftsmanship and a low-tech approach immediately stands out. They are driven by a desire to understand the building through the craft of making and learning by doing. They use natural materials to create spaces that embrace patina and age beautifully. Furthermore, their projects are guided by social value and civic ambition. They demonstrate how sustainable design can respect the past while building responsible and inspiring spaces for the future. This dedication has earned them an extensive list of prizes, including multiple Royal Institute of British Architects Awards and the shortlisting for the prestigious James Stirling Prize. But beyond the awards, these exact topics, place, material, and civic purpose, align perfectly with the architectural values we believe here at the department and in the faculty as well. Fergus, we are very happy to have you here. The floor is yours. And I would like to suggest the audience to grab the opportunity after the lecture to form question. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for hosting me today. It's a real honor to come here and see so many budding, young and middle-aged architects as well in this audience. I hope to give you a broad overview of our architectural philosophy, the drivers, our approach to materials, and our feeling, the kind of poetics behind some of the projects. So I'm going to talk to you about 5 key projects today, really, but it depends on the time and on whether I see you falling asleep or looking particularly engaged. But first of all, I just want to talk to you briefly about the practice culture, because all design comes from a design culture and the relationships with our clients and the relationships with space. We are based in central London on a site that is a temporary site, which is shared with a city farm. This is our site just here. You can see a barn. So that's the Houses of Parliament on the top left. And this is the busiest railway station in London, heading into Waterloo. And so I'll talk to you briefly about that project at some point. But we have a small team, and scale is important in design, in my opinion. That it doesn't become a melting pot of too many ideas and too many ingredients. So we have 25 people. So it's not to say that big practices can't design exquisite projects, but I do believe that you have to collate the right people for every project. And so for us, the way that we work among ourselves and across the projects and pulling in the expertise, in the same way as a studio works at university, is fundamental. And we started straight out of university. I'm going to keep a timer running, sorry, just so that I don't run over too long. We started straight from what we call part 1 in the UK. So there's 3 parts, and Ed and I did our first project when we were, I think we probably started when we were about 24 or so, which is highly irresponsible, but a very good way to learn. So And now we have this studio of 25 people, and this is our lightweight timber frame structure in London, which is designed to be demountable. Because of it was a high risk, because we only were going to be there for a few years. And we have a good culture of eating together, sharing ideas, and design review. Every project has to be presented to key people at each stage before it can move forwards, so that we make sure that there is a kind of a safety net, but there's also a shared knowledge across the projects. And I think visiting our sites is really critical as well. So this was whilst the Natural History Museum was on site, and we take the team to try and develop a kind of a shared ethos, shared values, shared references as well. Sometimes is quite useful. And these are the public buildings that we've currently delivered and that we're currently working on. So ranging from a number of galleries and museums through to landscape projects, and more recently kind of branching into more master plans and things. The scale of our projects has quite rapidly grown over the last 10 years. And on the farm site, the bottom left was the first structure that we did on our farm. Then this is our studio frame. The next one is the barn at the end. This was Homerton College. And I think we need to do a new diagram for the Railway Museum, which will largely fill this page. So big, broad span timber structures, but trying to use as much craft as possible. So on Homerton, for example, there are no metal fixings. We don't have flitch plates and things. It's using traditional carpentry methods despite the scale. And I think how architects grow from doing small-scale, beautiful, bespoke projects into something much more large and commercial, but that retains the soul and the kind of the feel of smaller projects is really fundamental. When I look at what happened in the UK with lots of architects, they were delivering exquisite projects, made their name, and then they won some big commercial projects, they grew rapidly, and something shifted. So it is a challenge, but we're trying our best to retain the essential values of where we started. So we're working across education projects. This one is at Homerton College, where we developed lots of elements to do with faience and ceramics. Using the timber, as I described, this is the jointing here. Some more commercial projects. I'm sorry, you can't quite see the setting very well here, but this is within a quarry. And the tones and the materials, often derived from the site or at least nearby, I think often make buildings feel a little bit more rooted in their place, and people recognize things, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. This is a cafe and a play space down in South London for a museum at the Horniman Museum. And again, landscape and architecture for us are always overlapping. A big project that I'll tell you a bit more about shortly is the Railway Museum in York, and that one is going on site now. So in 18 months, this project will be finished. So initially, I'll tell you a bit about our studio, just because it's an unusual setting and it's helped us grow as a practice, both kind of develop culturally, but also in terms of our design, and we've used it a lot to win work by bringing clients through the door and saying, this is a manifesto for our practice, and this building exemplifies what we're interested in. When we started, it was a complete jungle. It was a wasteland. It's a temporary site, and we were told we would have a 5-year lease for free on this site. So we cleared that site. It used to be former terraced housing, which was bombed in the war. Then it was used as a market garden, and it's gone through a series of uses. And then for the last 30 years, it was completely unoccupied. And so we were given 5 years. Here you can see this was the very first project, just some very simple animal pens that were that were sitting kind of independent of the wall so they could be dismantled in the future, some growing space, and very low budget. And 2 charities were involved in this site, and we were giving them our time for free, and we said, how about, rather than charging you, because they didn't have any funding for it, we said, why don't we get more involved? We give you our services, we build a studio, and they could share the space with us. So we gave them free desk space, and so it was a kind of an exchange, really. And then this barn was being funded in different pieces, and initially they were saying they wanted to have shipping containers, but the brief to us had been, we were told, we want the best city farm in Europe. Now, of course, how you quantify that, who knows, but in terms of design, we were saying, okay, if you want the best city farm, we're not going to do another container yard. We're going to support you with the funding, and we're going to give you an identity, and that this barn could then be used to be rented for weddings, for events, and that became the generator to make the whole site sustainable economically. And there were some very simple themes here around, it's almost like a church section. You know, we have a nave and we have aisles, and there was something about the ceremony of putting the barn up, about bringing the community together, getting people invested in it, and about the legibility of everything. So the way that you can see that the structure is made. This barn lasted here for 7 years, and now it's actually it's come down and it's moved to South London. So that's one of the major challenges. All of the projects here were designed to be moved. Initially, it was being used as an open structure, and then later on, we enclosed it, and it started to get used for different purposes, like having an outdoor classroom and things. So, and so many people have come through this space for different events, and people that I wasn't aware of, and you find out down the line that a client has actually visited the site for some reason. But it was, all of this was at risk. So, and initially, really quite a big risk. When we built the farm, we thought we would have 3 years. Then the global pandemic happened, and then the economy crashed, and all of these things, which meant that the whole project got delayed and delayed. So we were due to be kicked out in 2019, and we're still there, and we've now taken on a bit more space. Some of the site has moved, and some of it has been retained. But it was about giving a dignity, giving an identity, and a really robust, simple structure. In a way, this is the least, you could say it's the least contextual project of the ones I'm going to show today, because it was as a meanwhile space, and it was derived really through budget and identity and things. There were references back to agricultural buildings and the long history of the site, but not so much the kind of modern, the nature of this part of London. But London is a melting pot of architecture, people, and everything. So it's depending on where you're working, some bits are much more sensitive than others. I won't go through these bits, but we've done additional structures over time which have come into it. Our studio is very simple. It's a timber frame structure that is designed to be taken apart, and it's conceived of as part of a wider walled garden. So there is a datum, a bit like we have here with the windows, that wraps around the studio, and then we have glazing and the garden. And so the concept is that our studio is part of the walled garden, and the two flow from one to the other. And it's, as I say, it's demountable, and that's going to be put to the test in the next few years. It was all put up. Oh, this is quite a nice shot, because this is a guy called Alex, who was our first employee. He was our first employee, but he really should have been part of the partnership, because we studied with him, and he was with us for 3 years, was instrumental in the foundations of the practice. And then he felt that we probably didn't know enough about building. So he went off to become a carpenter. And now he has an incredible practice called Timber Workshop. So they're doing some of the finest timber frames. So It's funny how these things diverge, but his first project was our studio. He then built the barn, and so these long connections, of interwoven friendships and all sorts continue, and they're really fundamental. So, and quite utilitarian as well, using things like standard lintels from the builder's merchant for our paths, reusing as many of the bricks that we found on site within the paving, and trying to make it as much of a circular economy as possible. And then sitting among these big beasts. But in the future, all of these buildings, there's a master plan to take all of this down and put a new heart hospital, residential things, and all sorts. So quite a big shift. And in the meantime, we found this is a graveyard, closed graveyard. It's been closed for 150 years. And this is where the studio is due to be moved to, and it will sit very lightly on this graveyard in Bath. So over time, what we want to do as a practice is start to kind of draw a line across Europe from the west, from Bath in the west, London, and then hopefully in the future we'll be doing more European work as well. So I'm going to just talk to you about our first public project, which was called the Western. It's up in Yorkshire at the Sculpture Park, and it was won through an invited competition, which is actually how much of our work comes about these days. And I love an invited competition because normally there's the chance to actually meet people and develop the relationships, whereas some open competitions, while they're wonderful if you can win them and if you get the chance to connect with the end users and the client, that can be quite a challenge. So in this case, I cycled up to the site one day from Wakefield. I often do that on the first visit, arriving by foot or by bicycle, and seeing the cross section of the approach to a site, and then spending some time there. Although the day that I arrived was not a beautiful, bucolic winter's day like this. There was a massive storm, and it was such a big storm that my phone got wet and it died, and so I had to find my way, through kind of instinct, past the crematorium and all of these parts of northern England, which are quite depressed, to be honest, and then arrived at the Sculpture Park. So. Maybe on some level that shaped the approach, thinking about how to create a building that protected you from these elements. As a sculpture park, it's an incredible place with elements, with buildings or sculptures by James Turrell, Barbara Hepworth, all sorts of famous sculptors, Ai Weiwei, and across 500 acres. And I wasn't aware of how, I knew it was a very special project, but I didn't know that it would necessarily shape the whole future of our practice, especially the connection between architecture and landscape, and because that's what we've ended up being known for largely. So across this site, I don't know if this pointer, it's all right. At the top we have the main visitor centre, and at the bottom there is this place called Longside, and people walk across the park, and it had probably 600,000 visitors when we started the project. But what happens on lots of public sites is you get honey spots. So some or honeypots, some places are swarmed and overrun with people, and actually the visitor flow doesn't necessarily work as well for the organization. And so they wanted to create new routes, new destinations, and that could then open up sculpture trails and things. So where the red dot is where our project is. And that top swoop in the right-hand corner, that's the motorway. So the motorway is noisy, it's quite unpleasant. We are a few hundred meters from it, but that was not the context we wanted to look at. We wanted our building to be addressing the sculpture park. And so some of the questions that we were kind of facing when we started the project, first of all, what does it mean to build in a sculpture park? Is it a building? Is it a piece of sculpture? Is it Is it something that wants to be a building in the round? Should we use somewhere that was an existing context, or should we find something a completely different area? We had some flexibility in those decisions. They had already said that there was an existing car park, so that was useful to use that infrastructure. But where it sat was a bit flexible. And here you can see there's a big bowl. So this was once a quarry. And I think whenever you're looking at a site, I would take the time just to spend long enough to understand some of the prevailing conditions, where the sun is going, where people are passing it, where are they nestled, why are there no people on these benches on a beautiful day, are there views, etc. So I think that all good architects will be trying to do that, but instinct is still very important. So while we may have to represent what those constraints are and put them into beautiful drawings and things, the experience of arrival and first impressions are really fundamental. So for me, this boundary, this fence, was key, because it was the start, it was a threshold from one direction, and from the other direction it was going to be a destination. So I thought this is going to have two very different faces. This is out towards the sculpture park, and there's a big reservoir there, and we wanted to connect with that. And then the relationship of different people. So we had a guy I was working with on this who had done a sculpture course at the Slade in London, and he was bringing references of artists that we were not aware of. So things like this guy Michael Heiser, who did a piece called Double Negative, looking at excavating huge amounts of rock within, I think it was the Arizona, was it, I can't remember, no, maybe it was the Nevada desert, but anyway, it was about the kind of the sublime, the idea that buildings can, or spaces can move you in a way that mountains do, or that the mass of architecture can really do something completely different. And here we've got Robert Morris. This was a piece called The Observatory, and this was about sun paths. So again, layering in all of these different real and perceived constraints and opportunities. And at the interview, it wasn't really a design competition as such, but inevitably we wanted to show how we were thinking and how we would approach it. So was it about views, a cut in the ground, a figure in the landscape, what kind of destination, and what kind of form, what would we do with the topography here? So just early thoughts on that. This is the plan of the building in the end, and here's an enlarged plan. So you can see that along this northeast elevation, there's almost no windows, and I think often as architects, we quite like to do projects which have very few windows because they're very sculptural. I mean, it's not so practical on one level, but in a shallow plan building, we have other opportunities. We have the fifth elevation. You can drop light in. We also have then this arc looking out towards the sculpture park. And I always thought of it as having a big wingspan. Its arms were embracing the people coming across the park. And then on this other elevation, you descend into the ground and come through this moment, and suddenly it opens up. So some of the kind of English landscape traditions about conceal and reveal, about mass and light, about texture, smoothness. Some of it was very refined. Some of it is very coarse. So initially, it was going to be constructed from rammed earth, and in the end, because of things like a number of factors, regulations, funding, the Arts Council funded it, we couldn't get warranties, so we ended up making it from local aggregates, but it did become, a concrete wall that was referencing all of these different rock types and quarries in the area. So we sourced different aggregates from here, and then we did a number of tests to try and find the tones that were like The stone there is called millstone grit, and it's not particularly beautiful, but it does have certain qualities. This always made me laugh. I was working with this guy Ross. These are the contractors, and you can see how terrible some of the early trials were. But that's why, you know, I think it's important to have prototypes and get involved and understand where things are going wrong and just what might happen. If we had just specified it, it could have ended up like a very stripy, hideous building. So after that, we developed these constraints. So this was a specification on the left-hand side. And while architects like to be precise, and you try and be as precise as possible up to a point, that's also where the craft comes in and where the maker comes in. And that's the joy for me, is the unexpected within certain parameters. So we tried to control it within reason, and we certainly selected all the aggregates, the size of aggregate, and the methodology. And then these guys who had never done anything like this before came along, and there were moments that were unexpected. You can't really see it in this image, but where it was sprayed, there were erosions that were as though it had been there for 30, 40, maybe 200 years. So that was really nice. And then here you can see the tones. So this is the landscape which we've cut away, and that's the tone of the building. And in a way, that was almost my favorite point in the whole project, because the gallery has a real presence. You can see the north lights, and then the retaining walls and things were very much of the land, which was how it was conceived. And speaking of the land and of clay and of brick and things, we did a humidity buffer here, which was all of these bricks here are unfired clay bricks. So they're hygroscopic, so they regulate the moisture content in the air. And there are some holes here on the right-hand side, you can see in the gallery wall. So what we were doing is we were regulating the incoming air to get it roughly to, I think it was plus or minus 4%, 50% relative humidity, which was required for the artwork. And you could bypass air through this, but I think the only thing which was a shame is that people don't see that. So, but knowing it is a very nice aspect of it. And then this is that curve on the park side. So you can see it's a very subtle arc. Kind of, originally we wanted it to be set out through one sculpture point in the landscape, and so it was a radius of that. And you don't perceive it from many places. I think it's always good to reflect on what works and what doesn't work. And one of the criticisms of this project, and I think it was totally valid, was that we hid those north lights, that we created a screen around it. And for us, it was about the light, and that you would sometimes read the forms behind it. But in a way, I think that was partly because of our relative youth at the time, and we were trying to do too many things. And when it came to judging, I remember them saying, why did you cover those up? And it was partly because of cost and things, but really, at the end of it, no one ever comes back in 30 years and says, what was the budget? They just want to know whether it stood the test of time, that it's a robust, beautiful building. And one day we'll all be gone, but hopefully our projects will be standing. And it has very different qualities of life. You can just see this sheep in the bottom corner. When it was first built, the building was the boundary. The animals came up to the building, and now sadly they don't, because they ate all of the plants. So we had some really nice varieties of alpine plants and things that were designed to sit in the rocks. But anyway, it's I think the light works very well, and it's unusual in that. So we have the north lights, and then off to the left we have a framed view of the whole of the landscape. So they didn't want this to be a white box gallery. They wanted it to have personality, and there's little moments like the base of the north lights where they're rounded off. I love that. I thought that I know you can't fold light, but the perception that light might fold round the base of the bull nose, I thought was really lovely. And it sits quite quietly when you're further away. Most of our projects are using natural materials. So this is using a lime render for the walls, for the plaster, Douglas fir, and lots of, a nice palette of natural materials. Also, I thought that we had designed quite a few school buildings before this, and they can take a real kicking, to be honest, so literally and metaphorically. So I was worried about the precision of materials here, but because it's a gallery and because it's loved and people come into this space and they calm down and they're respectful, it's lasted amazingly well. So I'm really delighted with that. And then this is the other approach. So that's that wall and the way that you descend down, and then this is this is called the Walk of Art, which is in the approach. So core 10 panels. So and you could sponsor those, have your name carved into them, and people feel kind of a part of the building, which is what the Sculpture Park had done previously at the main visitor centre. I don't know, did you ever work on Yorkshire Sculpture Park?
Too young, but I remember.
Yeah. So Akos was working with Feilden Clegg Bradley, who did the main Sculpture Park, but Akos is a young man, so he was wasn't doing that at the time. But that was an idea that they had taken from the other building. And the head of the Sculpture Park described it as a kind of pencil line in the landscape. So something that was, it didn't need to be a big shouting civic building. It was a destination in its own right, and it's been very successful. So the next project which came slightly off the back of this, was called the Freightery, which comes from refectory at Carlisle Cathedral. And we were still quite a young practice, and we were against some really excellent architects. But Carlisle is in the far north of England, and it's a hard place to get to. And one of the reasons we were told that we won the job was that we said, we will be involved throughout. I said that I would be involved throughout, not realizing that many 5:30 a.m. trains would be quite tiring. But it was all about the relationships. And when we started there's this building here, which is the old Freightery building. And as you can see, a pretty terrible, neglected setting. Cars in the middle of one of the most important civic spaces in the city. Cars could drive through only at certain times, but they were parking there. There was no love in the landscape. And people would walk through this part of town and not ever pause and see and appreciate the building. It's not quite as dark as this, but it is very dark, the north face of the Freightery building. And then on the right-hand side here, there was quite a famous Victorian architect who put a new entrance, but it was a really compromised, terrible entrance. And they reversed a historic doorway, a 200-year-old doorway there, which we were proposing re-reversing. And then internally, it had curtains, it was dark, it was stained, it was smoky. It was really not a very beautiful environment, although it did have a 17th century library. And the cafe was underneath, and the cafe was a pretty dreadful space, to be honest, in the vaults, and very municipal and a bit depressing. And in terms of accessibility, there was no accessibility. You had to come up the steps. So this is that doorway there. You can see, so 2 flights of steps, even internal steps, a screen in the middle of the main space, all sorts of all sorts of issues, really. And actually, a few of our projects have had former lives, former architects and former designs. And this was one. Somebody had been working on this for 10 years, and eventually it didn't get support from the key people. So the key people in this case were called the Cathedrals Fabric Commission. And they're a bunch of very well-to-do, old, generally white English people who, in theory, are there to preserve the cathedrals. And sometimes they do, but we had to persuade them. So, and actually, I have to say, they were very good in our case. We tried to give a really clear narrative. The narrative was around recreating a cloister and about creating a space in the heart of the city again. So the former scheme was much smaller, but it was hugging that edge of the building where 2 is. It was like extruding number 2 all the way across that red box. And we said, I think it should have a smaller connection. I think it should just have a lightweight connection, and then it can breathe in its own right. And it doesn't have to be something that has to be too shy. And we decided to take the cafe out of the basement and put it into this space. And it was to slow people down on their way through the precinct, and that they could sit in the cafe and appreciate where they were. So on the left-hand side, that's the doorway when it was facing the other way, and this was our concept on the right of creating an axial route through. Sorry, I don't know whether it's not actually projecting, is it? So you're okay. Can everyone actually hear me, by the way? Yeah? Okay, good. So that would be a shame, wouldn't it, to ask that right at the end. So in the second image, you can't see it, but there's a beautiful lattice ceiling. So, and that for us was one of the inspirations. So we were just looking around the whole precinct, trying to say, what has happened here? There's a style called the transept Gothic, which is very refined. So in stonework, very lightweight tracery. So they would take heavyweight materials and give them a really fine leading edge, which just catches the light, and it makes the material feel much, much lighter. And so we loved the transept Gothic and the principles of that, and the tracery in the windows. And we thought, well, maybe we could explore that. So we were looking at different forms of arches, but in particular the dropped arch. So this is the Freightry, and this was our kind of quite simple analysis of that geometry and how we could take it into the new building. So originally we were going to have a rectilinear, much more contemporary building, but we ended up merging the styles, which can be a bit risky, but in order to bring everyone on the journey, that was really important. And you can see our building in the background in this elevation, kind of that rhythm running on. And the thing which I really liked about it, so it's all using local limestone, not limestone, sandstone. It's called Locker Briggs, and it has this beautiful veining in it. The thing which I loved was that it catches the light in a different way through the day, and you'll see in a moment with some of the images. So this was reversing that doorway, discovering Viking graves and all sorts of things. The bronze worker, we ended up fabricating it with a bronze worker in Wales. It was a very tight budget, but we had a local contractor and everyone. It was kind of a project of love from everyone really involved. And then I've just got some finished images. So you can see it sits there, breaking that route through. You can walk past the building, but it holds that space. And here you can see the shadows on those arches and the way that as the sun passes round, it's read in a completely different way. And with the inspiration on the right-hand side there of the elevation of the Freightry. And that's that bronze link structure. We didn't want anything that was too much nothing too glazed. It all faces north, so that helps. And then when you're within the building, you you can read that historic context. That's the stairway. Again, little learning points. I really hate those lights. I was working with the project architect, and I think now I'm probably more of an editor on projects than I once was. I think. I mean, I always, in terms of the materials and the design, it was really fundamental. But now I think we're much better architects than we were, say, this was designed 7-8 years ago. So that's that doorway reversed and connecting down into the cafe, and the library space, which is now, everything is lighter. You can read the structure. It's now a wonderful space to be in, and it's become economically kind of resilient for them as well. That was a very special project. Is everyone okay? I know there's a lot of information and an awful lot of slides. Okay, every project is different, so hopefully that will keep everyone going. I know that yesterday was a massive, wonderful day in the history of Hungary, and hopefully everyone had a drink to celebrate. So this project is called the Urban Nature Project, and it's another project that we inherited from another architect. So originally they ran a big international design competition, and there ended up being more building than landscape. And so our proposal was to bring back more landscape and try and reduce this project back to the essence. And in fact, when we won it, there were very few buildings, and in the end, there's 2 buildings and a timeline wall and all sorts that we ended up being involved with. A few headlines. So founded in 1753, opened in 1881, 80 million specimens in their collection. They've got 1,000 staff. They had 5.7 million visitors when we started the project. It's now up to 7 million. It's now the most visited museum in the UK, ahead of the British Museum. So it has to be very hard wearing and deal with huge numbers of visitors. There were so many different partnerships that came into this, but the education and how the landscape was used as a tool for the education was really fundamental. Luckily, the drawings actually project best, I think, on this, so it's quite good. They've got lots of more drawings in this one. So it's just off Exhibition Road, where lots of the big museums in London are, connecting up to Hyde Park. So there's the Victoria and Albert Museum next to it, on the other side of Exhibition Road, and then we've got the Science Museum, and the Natural History Museum is everything in grey here, but it also extends significantly further back. And the main entrance is in the centre, and then they've got these 2 very different gardens on either side. When we started the project, the landscape at this site had always been very neglected. It was used commercially. They would put an ice skating rink in the winter on this grass, and they would sometimes have some exhibitions. But really, it was a huge missed opportunity in the centre of London, where lots of people also don't have access to good greenery, especially within a 500-metre radius of this site. There's almost nothing. There is a huge park further north, but for families and things, when they wanted to come to the museums, it was an internal experience. This is the other side, just a very bland lawn, some amazing trees, and really quite a wonderful resource in terms of this set of ponds and things that was one of the most studied landscapes in the UK, because they have something like 300 scientists working for them, and so it was really important that all of the biodiversity from the ponds was retained. So those ponds were lifted, transplanted, and then put back, but all of the species were still there. There's this incredible building by Waterhouse, and very formal. but then the gardens are sunk. So we thought, well, maybe we could reimagine the setting of these buildings and really give them a grounding. The access was terrible, a number of different access points. Coming out of the tube, there was no ramped access, and so you regularly got scenes like this on the right of people struggling up and down steps, or people simply wouldn't come to the museum. So expanding those opportunities was fundamental. And then there were some very odd bits of architecture on the site, including this oval shape, which was kind of semi-fenced off. And that was not part of the project originally, but we said, well, we have a hinterland, we have a threshold to our project, and we want to incorporate as much of this as possible. On the West Garden is present living natural history. On the left was all about past inorganic and dead natural history. So it's an amazing building with all sorts of references within the facade, but it's of a scale that you can't necessarily use the existing building as a learning tool. It's impressive, but so these were the points in the brief that we were trying to hit. So we wanted to create an immersive experience, moving through the Earth strata. So a lot of this was about the geology of Britain, and Britain has some of the best geology in the world. Being habitat-led, varying scales, seeing all of this from a range of different perspectives and heights and ages, treading lightly, so trying not to destroy the existing habitats, respecting the historic setting and sustainability and a timelessness. So we worked with J&L Gibbons, who are a brilliant landscape architect, but it was very much a kind of co-design process. You won't be able to read this, but it starts on the right-hand side, coming out of the tube, and it's the explosion of life. So, and then you move to the land. So initially, you're going through a very rocky environment where there's no life whatsoever, but it's pre-life. Moving to land, then there was a big extinction event, and then after that, you've got the age of the dinosaurs. Again, another extinction event, and then moving up to the modern world, and then all through to kind of much more nature-based learning on the right-hand side. Precambrian through to the Anthropocene, and then looking at these pause points. So it's interesting, there were many people involved, access consultants, etc. But I do think that so much of design, you need to test it against those constraints. But equally, it's still an emotional experience. It's still a piece of poetry and sculpture and something beyond what one could design using ChatGPT or something. So, and we did that partly through just the sheer number of brilliant people who contributed to this project. So this is the evolution garden, and up in the top there is the kitchen garden, and coming out of the tube here, this is there's what's called the timeline wall. So here is an early geological section by William Smith in 1815. So William Smith was often called like the father of English or the father of geology, and he was working on the canals, and then he lost his job, and he rode a horse around the whole of Britain and made these beautiful maps, like drawing all of the different rock types that he found. So in our timeline wall, where those numbers are, where we took samples of different rocks which went into the timeline wall. One of my colleagues was lucky enough to go and help select them, and things like they took a little lightweight airplane out to the Outer Hebridean Islands and things, and landed on the beach and found some of the oldest rocks on the planet. This is a guy called Paul Jenrick, who's from the museum. He's their geologist, so he was going on all those trips and helping select them. And then then one of the big challenges, same with all of these projects, you might have a concept about how you want to deliver something, but how you make it reality and how you don't make it, how you stop it being a piece of pastiche or being something that looks too kind of commercial somehow, is one of the major challenges. So when they first did some samples of this, they were stacking the stones and they looked like dry stone walls and they were really quite poor. And then we found that we ended up saying that we would map every stone and lay out every stone based on what they had taken to their yard. And anyway, it was a very long process, but this is a drawing of the timeline wall, which we did for the Royal Academy Summer Show, and it talks about all of those different types. So the floor connects back to the walls, connects back to the planting, and so it's quite a kind of holistic project. And these are some before and after shots. So this is that former approach, and then this is now as you come out of the tube. Looking up at the Waterhouse building, and what's really lovely is that whenever we've had a photographer there, it's taking photographs of people taking photographs, because people are stopping and they're marveling. Maybe they're mainly marveling at the Waterhouse, as they should be, but it's really nice that the setting now feels appropriate. And those qualities I described earlier of the natural, of the sublime, and of kind of a mass and something that moves people to feel, it moves them emotionally, I think is really fundamental in our public projects. And then weaving education through the whole thing. So these are elements that are embedded within the paths. The way that the signage works and things are relating back to these huge fossils that we have within the landscape. There is a bronze diplodocus, which is designed so that if people arrive on a stag do, they can hang off it and it won't kill them. All those kind of interesting design constraints. And then the paths are using the rocks from the times. So into the Anthropocene, where we actually have bits of glass and pipes, smoking pipes and things. But it's trying to work on all levels. And over the next few years, as the gardens progress and grow up and up, I think it will become more and more of an immersive experience. So, yeah, it's been a really interesting project. I've got some of the buildings, but I'll probably just rattle through those because I think we're doing okay for time, aren't we? Okay, it's nearly been going for an hour. You're doing well. Somehow there aren't many people asleep in the audience. It's won some Wood Awards recently, which was really great. Everything is articulated. I think that much of our work, we want it to be legible. So it's based on quite simple principles, axial designs, simple plans, sections, that gives it a legibility. But then it's about the quality of light, the quality of the natural materials, the craft, the moments that you see where two materials will join, and how those are perceived. And then we also converted some of an existing building. So this was all open. So they then have an event space, which is very different, but kind of frames back to the garden. On the other side, we have all of this landscape that I described that was taken up, and an education centre. And what we wanted to do is drop people down to the level of the ponds so that children and things and people in wheelchairs can access the dipping ponds and be aware of, they can use it for experiments, and again it becomes a much more immersive environment. And in terms of the interpretation, things like these listening tubes, you listen and there's the sound of a beetle munching away on the foliage and things. So everything is trying to work for different age groups, different abilities. Here you can see a school group in among the ponds. And we ended up, designing all of the hard landscaping bits around this. And then the Nature Activity Centre is a very simple building, similar to our studio actually, but a much more heavyweight, permanent example, and with details where we celebrate the water and things. It sits very low in that landscape. It has an external covered space with a bench all the way along it. This was an early visual of what we wanted to do, so bringing transparency through the whole thing. And then this is the finished building. And actually, it gets used by so many people. The outside of the building, I think, is used more than the inside, which is it's great to see, because that's open to all the public. And for people who are interested, they can learn about the different stone types and things. But I think that these projects have to work on all levels. I don't think that they shouldn't be so elitist that you only if you've read the book will you understand the building. That's that detail in reality and how it was delivered. So I have two more projects, but I will probably just do this one, and then maybe we'll either take questions then, or maybe I'll try that, because this is another project that is about to start on site. Starts on site next month. It's now in contract. The Railway Museum is the biggest railway museum in the world in terms of the numbers of trains and carriages. It was run as an open design competition, and York was once the busiest railway station in the world in about 1870, so not within our living memories. And this is a plan showing the number of railway lines coming in to the site, and so it was a mess, if I'm honest. You know, it was an industrial landscape, and it's been an industrial landscape pretty much since the railway was there. The station has been developed, but they're now going to do a huge, great £2 billion master plan putting housing to the north, and the Railway Museum is the cultural anchor to that site. As it was, the current Railway Museum was separated by quite a busy road, and it's taken 5 years to close that road, and it's now closed, which is why the project is going ahead. Our concept at competition was really about combining both railway heritage and the patterns, the motifs, the way that Victorian railway architecture worked, and also museum design. So we were looking at things like the Alters Museum plan, while also looking at things like roundhouses for railways, which was how they turned the trains, turned the engines. And so this is our site. As I say, it's rather messy at the moment. So the main railway station coming through York is there at the base, and then we were dealing with these two really awkward geometries. So our project is in blue there, and it's where the road is, and we're putting a roundhouse at the centre of it. Interestingly, at the walk around with the client, when we were, I think there may even be I thought there was maybe a picture of that. Sorry, when we were at interview, I asked the client, thinking that we were the same as everyone else. I said, "Do you know any of our projects? Have you been to the sculpture park?" "Oh yes, that's why you're on the list." So there's often some connection. And then I thought, and I said, "Oh, what do you like about it?" And they said, "We love the way that the environmental performance is working with the unfired clay bricks." So immediately you then go, okay, fine, we know what is resonating with them. So, and the brief on this one actually said, we don't want anything to do with railway architecture, but it felt so crazy to be doing a project here in this historic setting and not be drawing from it. So there were all of these different turntables on the site, and our concept was to do another one. So this is their main hall with lots of the trains. This was at the before the interview when all the architects came and did the kind of beauty parade where you walk around. We decided to do lots of our design workshops on the site, which was quite helpful, and just observe how other people were using the site. This was with the client. I only put this one in because there's only 2 people remaining from that team now, and I think that often the architect is one of the few people who will stay on a project from start to finish. So that's really it's really fundamental. And so this was one of the pieces of inspiration. And what we're doing is we're creating a roundhouse at the center, but in a broad span timber structure. It's a composite structure with an oculus at the top, and then they have a little turntable here. But this space is supposed to be a holding space where you come into this space and you can read the whole museum. At the moment, you go underneath an underpass, or formerly you went under that road. So the one place you wanted to read everything from, you were in a dark box. And so our concept was inverting that so that you create a proper space at the heart of the museum. And then the drum is going to be clad in copper. We've been making some structural models to test that. I was heavily involved at the start, then less involved for a while, and now we're going back on site. I'm heavily involved again, which is often how the projects, how my involvement works. And what we're trying to do at the moment is get the materiality to be much more grounded. It's becoming much heavier. I had the landscape design is outside of our remit, but I think it's the job of the architect to advocate for not just your building, but everything around it. So I did make myself quite unpopular and had to spend 6 months having a battle. And to be honest, I told, sometimes you have to be honest, and it was beyond crap. And so I said, if we are delivering a public space that we would be embarrassed about, why are we here? So and thankfully, everyone has come on that journey, and now there was no greenery, there was no planting in the whole space, there was no seating, there was no shade, there was nothing. And so now we've got more trees than is shown here. We've got seating, we've got we've got a range of things. So I've talked for an awfully long time, and I think probably it might be nice. Should we take questions? I do have another project, but I think maybe it would be nice to open the floor. And please don't feel embarrassed. You can ask anything. I mean, most of you here are at the very start or early days in your careers, so there's no expectation to know anything. It's more what your interests are. And otherwise, I've got some people I can pick on. Yes?
Are these experimentations initiated by you? Or do you do you pursue your clients is this necessary, or how does it work in practice?
That's a great question. So for anyone who didn't hear, the question is around whether the experimentations are led by us or the client, or how they come about. So I would say that because many of our projects are won at competition, we get the client to buy into an idea early on, and that then gets published, and that people see that it is going to be in rammed earth, or it is going to be a project that is made from a certain ceramic, or that it has an iconic form. So we definitely drive it, but I try and make sure that it becomes a foundation stone of a project, especially around structure and material. So most of our projects, you couldn't take out the timber and swap it for steel or concrete or something like that. It's so fundamental to the way that the project is conceived. And when those pressures do come in, which they always do, someone will come in and say, this project is, you know, £500,000 over budget. If we change this material for something, we can deliver it on budget. Which is a fair comment, but I will normally say to them, why don't we take a little bit longer? We will do some work for free to produce some more, might be some more visuals or something to help with the funding. We get very involved in the funding of these projects as well. And I will say it's a PR risk, because I genuinely believe it. If a client comes to you and says, I want the most environmental building, and it's designed, if we deliver a building that is performing terribly or is made all from steel and glass where it didn't have to be, then I say this will reflect on you as much as us. So there's different levers that I will pull. I'm going to pick on you, Akash.
No, I think there's so many things to ask, and I try to find something that might be useful for everyone, because I had the good fortune to have known each other for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Even briefly worked together.
Exactly, yeah.
But I think what everyone would be probably interested in as the start of their careers, what were those factors that got you going, because you typically started very early.
Yeah.
And I think there are two kinds of architects, I guess, like that. The ones that start right after school at the university, and the ones that are waiting too long to do their own.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to anyone who's thinking of, oh gosh, can I start on a single project?
Yeah.
Or is it too risky? When's the best time to do it?
Well, it's a great question. My advice is get the experience that you can. You don't have to present everything when you're going for future jobs and things, but you do want to be able to, the way that we approach things is that you need a broad portfolio, and then when you're going for something, you tailor it and you say, this is what it's about. So I think for young people, you know, you can work on a building site for a bit. You can also work in a few different practices. You may be somebody who, it's partly about knowing what type of architect you want to be and what type of, some people are very singular and say, I want to do this type of architecture and this type of practice and this is what I'm going to do. But for other people, if you're not sure, and most people are probably not entirely sure, it's good to try a few different things. And they don't all have to be, you know, at the moment it's really hard finding jobs in architecture, but there are lots of things connected with it. So sometimes people are working in exhibition design for a bit, or they're working in project management, or they are, whatever it might be. You know, in your free time, we have a thing called Open City in London, and lots of people who come to us have been volunteers, and they're showing people around buildings. So I think that until a certain point, hopefully for all of our careers, we're still learning and we're still expanding. But certainly for the next 10, 20 years at least, I would hope that you're all trying to say, I'm trying to understand broader things. I mean, that for me is why I was really delighted to be invited here today, to meet other people, to see new things, to spend some time in a different city, see how Budapest is during probably the most historic election for the last 2 decades. Or that was just good fortune, the timing. But all of those things, you're learning from them. You're seeing how people are using the public space. You're seeing how they're using buildings. So I personally would say try lots of different things. And then it also, when you're putting it in your CV and you're putting it in your portfolio, it's great. It shows that you're excited. It shows that you're interested. And the relationships is fundamental. I mean, I want to work with people who care about what they're doing. And so when I'm looking at that, I always look at what people have done. You know, it might be travel, it might be drawing, it might be pottery, it could be, there's no right and wrong, but there is certainly a kind of an attitude. And the other thing I personally look at is the trajectory that people are going on. So they don't have to be a superstar from day one. In fact, often it's quite interesting when people were not going to do architecture, or that they started maybe in not the best school and then they went to a better one, or they did that through practice. But you can see that it's intentional, and you can see that they're thinking about what are the things that I need to do to be interested, to be a good architect, to contribute. And I mean, of course I'm biased, but I mean, I think, it's such a privilege. We are shaping cities, we're shaping the world, we're shaping society. If we do it properly, then we can have as much influence as anyone else. It's a great position.
And I think it has to be said that we are very privileged to have you here. I'm not sure how much you guys know Fergus and his practice, but I think once you were very early, the very early days of your success, and you are kind of straight at the beginning was a bit of a superstar in the profession, because your practice got more hits. We put in Feilden in Google, and you get more hits for Feilden Fowles than Feilden like Bradley, which is supposed to be a 40-year-old established practice, which is a bit of a shame.
It's the perils of marketing, I'm afraid.
And I think this is a very I haven't been here for the other talk. Probably were very, very good, great lineup, but I'm pretty sure that this is the special one to have you here.
Oh, thank you.
You're also very good. You embody this broad and open-minded approach. Very few people can talk about that so well, I think. And that's evident in your work, that it's not one niche, but your jobs.
No, that's very kind. But I think, it can be, architects and architecture can be quite singular. And there is, as I said, there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think that there is also a place for the polymath, for the breadth, and for working out. I mean, I personally would say I would be a terrible solo practitioner. I couldn't do it. I have so much respect for those people. I need a team around me, and I need to be able to work out who to do different things. And that's what fires me up. But for some people, they're good at a bit of everything, and having total control is right for them. So there's as many types of architect as there are types of people. So I think that's one of the joys of the profession as well. Any more questions? Yes.
Could you tell us a bit more of your practice? Like how many? Like you mentioned that you were like 25 people. Like how is like the teamwork in the practice, and how do you pick the members for a project? And like, do you have a landscape architect in your team?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a very good question about how we work as a practice of 25 people. So we broadly split the projects between myself and Ed, and we oversee those projects. Then we'll probably have, for a big project, we'll have an associate normally in charge of it. Our role is in the early stages. So when I say our role, I mean me and Ed as directors. We will be involved in the early stages of the design, and probably at least one review a week, probably on most projects. Some projects I'm much more involved with. I mean, the ones I showed you today, the Railway Museum, Yorkshire Sculpture Park, Carlisle, they're all my personal, absolute passion projects. And I've gone through different teams with those projects, and sometimes we're better aligned than others. Right now we're at the point where we've got an excellent team where it feels like the skills are being deployed in the right places. But 4 years ago, it was a painful process, because we had some good architects, but the communication wasn't as good as it should have been. And so now we're trying to very much find the right people for the projects, rather than just saying these people have got good CVs, and it doesn't matter where they work. It makes so much difference if the people are championing their own projects. So we have the structure of the practice. We have 2 directors. We have 4 associates, of whom only 2 are architects or practicing architects. Then we have, I think, 4 senior architects. And then we have quite a big middle at the moment of newly qualified and Part 2 architects. And that's the engine room of the practice. They're the ones with the incredible skills. They produce the most wonderful models, images, and everything else. And then we have two Part 1 students as well. One thing which it's a nuance, but it's quite an important one. There's a London living wage they've brought in, which is important, but it means that the most newly qualified architects now earn the same as the architects. So, which means that it's quite hard. And so as a chartered practice, you have to pay that, which you want to do. But of course, if you're given somebody with 3 or 4 years experience versus none, and they cost the same, that's a challenge. And we don't take interns and things because we thought that was actually, it privileged people who already had the money. So that's the kind of, that's one of the challenges. And that's why I think for me, education is really interesting. And in the long term, I mean, like the project that Akos and I worked on, it was a thing called Studio in the Woods and things like that, you know, where it might be a 1-week workshop or a few-day workshop. I think that that's a really nice way of sharing out experience as well. So I think in the future, or doing more teaching like you guys are, which is so fundamental. So, yeah. I hope that answered your question, kind of. You can ask me more after. Oh, sorry, no, we don't have, no, that's a very good point. We don't have landscape architects. We've talked about it a lot, and I think we may do in the future. But that's a really fundamental one in that we can choose the teams for each project. And so, although there are similar, we're using the same structural engineer for most of the projects, but the landscape architects are changing for each of them because the settings are so different. And the mechanical and electrical engineers are changing as well. So I think, yeah, I mean, for me, being a design team leader is such a key responsibility of being an architect. It's up to us to sell the vision, to bring the whole team on and make sure that, yeah, make sure that we add value. Every person in the team is adding value. And when they're not, you know, generally we have good relationships, but we do sometimes get rid of the engineer at mid-stage or and things like that, which of course is massively it's unpopular, but if people are not, for me it's a responsibility. They're public buildings. and then no one's going to care whether I worked on it or whether the engineer worked on it. In the future, they should be saying, does it work? Yeah. Great. Yes?
Just a bit more about the design process. I think it's really evident from the others that the relationship between the building and the environment is very important. What's the key aspects when you start designing and how do you perceive the site?
Okay, that's a great question about the process and how we perceive the site and where we start. For me, where you site the building is absolutely key. You know, whether it's to do with, and that changes every time. Some sites will be about, you know, a big, you know, you take all of these buildings in Budapest. There's some wonderful formal civic buildings that are cited because they have a status. They hold a certain space within the city. Other projects will want the building almost to disappear. There's one of my favorite projects I was going to show you, but I thought I've probably talked enough. It's a new gallery in a national park, and that project was about whether we were creating a gallery that was it going to be discovered or was it going to be very much at the forefront. And it's such a beautiful landscape that in the end we've broken all the buildings down into being smaller buildings, being separated. And so sometimes there's an instinct which we're working with, but it takes a while to actually settle on the plan. I quite like competitions because they force that process quite quickly. And so we'll start with a very rough model and plan and experience it and take, you know, which are the key views of a building, and is there something we can draw from? So one of the ones I was going to show was a competition in Antwerp for a gallery. There was a former dock space underneath a building, and for us that was the origins of the site. So we wanted to expose that, and then everything evolved from that point. So yeah, finding what those few things are. And in the future, I've been trying to get us to do proper top sheets for every project. So the top sheet would have one concept image or one concept model, a paragraph about what it is we're trying to achieve, because each project is probably pushing one idea, apart from it working as a public project. Is it about a material? Is it about a social program? Is it about something that is not going to happen in the next 10 years? Like, is it a master plan? Or what might it be doing? It's got to kind of, where's the added value, I suppose? And then from that, the other things start to kind of layer in. So personally, I think all architecture is built from constraints. And once you understand those constraints and where you're going to push them and where you're not, or where you're going to embrace them, then you start to design buildings and spaces that are of their place. In my second year, we had a huge landscape in East London that had almost no constraints. And I just saw students like disappearing literally into the kind of distance. Buildings that were spreading, they were far too big, or people who were kind of, I don't know, I just thought it was really clear. And with the Railway Museum, these two angles, when I looked at the other competition schemes, you had to maintain a public route through it. And I could imagine the struggle that was going on in the other offices about how you merge these two geometries. Some people just pulled the buildings apart and put a public square in the middle. I think 2 or 3 practices did that. One did a really wavy scheme that tried to kind of please everyone, and 2 of us did something quite similar, of just saying, it's okay, we're going to embrace what we're dealing with, but we need a form that can deal with 2 very difficult angles. So the only harmonious form is a circle in plan. So yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, but it's also, that's the joy of it. It's like, yeah. And it's okay to tell clients when it doesn't work as well. I mean, it's not very popular, but turning jobs down because they're not feasible, I think, is really important. I think we're more defined by the jobs that we don't take than the ones we do. In the early days, we were turning down probably 80% of the projects, but then they were more like domestic. Whereas now, we're fighting for everyone because they're public and they all have to go to competition. But that meant that we were known for doing certain things, and we always presented ourselves as not being domestic architects. There's nothing wrong with domestic architects, but I always said we're interested in civic, public, impactful projects, and we changed the whole website to say that, even when we didn't have a public building. So that's the PR side of it. Anyone else?
Yes, maybe you should tell us how you and your assistant and how you met each other in those.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so the question is around how I met Ed and how we started out. So we were in our second year of university, very, very different students at that stage. We actually met when we were out cycling, visiting one of our sites, and then we started talking about bikes. That was our first starting point. And then in our second year, we had a tutor who brought in an element of, we had a kind of an internal competition. And you started in pairs, and you had to design a pavilion. And then the next round, half the teams were voted out, and you paired up with other people. So you went from 2, we had, I think, 16 people in our studio. So initially there were 8 teams. I was with Ed. We won the first round, we got through to the next one, so then we paired with another one, and you took on another person's project. So every 2 weeks you were swapping projects, which is a really interesting challenge, and then you could develop it how you wanted, and then you did the same again. And so we got through to the final round, and then we didn't win the final round, but they built somebody else's, but it was good. And I thought, oh, we've got contrasting skills here. Initially, he was an absolute details, interiors person. I was more tectonic and more about buildings in landscape. but then our skills developed over time. And when T Pren, which was our first project, a small house in Wales, came up, I asked him whether he was interested, and he absolutely bit my arm off, as we say. You know, he was desperate to do the project. So then we did that project together, and found that it was a really productive relationship. And then the rest is history. Anyone else? You're remarkably patient, I have to say. I mean, you've got good concentration levels. It speaks highly of the school, I think. You know, it's great. And of the attendance, especially, given yesterday's events.
How international is your team currently? How many foreign?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we're probably about 50% non-UK architects, I would have said. We've recently we've been trying to diversify quite a lot anyway, and actually I think now that we're also getting known a bit wider, that's helping as well. So I think it's only a good thing. I mean, I love the different references that people bring that are outside of certain UK schools, you know. So, sorry?
Who's coming from furthest?
South Korea, probably. Maybe that's the furthest. We've got Canada, South Korea. We've got we've got people from mainly it's European, but yeah. So, but I mean, by London standards, our practice is still not that diverse, I would say. So it's it's one of the challenges. That's why I've taken recruitment back on myself, because I think it's just so key. I mean, your team is your family, it's your community. And so I think, that is really important. Yeah.
You see the experimentations, whatever it means, and the building codes.
Yeah.
How comes it together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good question. So we have quite strict building codes and regulations, because you don't have to be an architect to deliver a building in the UK. So that's why most of the buildings in the UK are pretty poor standard, actually. So we find that we try and push the boundaries as far as we can. The hardest boundaries at the moment are all around fire in the UK, because there was a big disaster a few years ago, the housing block that burnt down. So the fire is the biggest challenge. And also contractors not wanting to take responsibility. So, but also, actually, I think architects not taking responsibility. I'm constantly saying to our team, if we want to be experimental, we have to take some liability, because the contractor, understandably, is saying, why are you pushing it to us if you don't trust it? So we're doing a project which is in chalk and flint, and everyone's saying, well, how is this material going to move with heat and everything else? And in the end, I'm trying to say, well, look, why don't we say, we know approximately what's going to happen. We know that it's not going to leak. We know it may need some repairs. We can take out specific insurance. But I would rather that we find these ways and persuade people to say, there will be micro cracks, you know, and the things might change a little bit, but you've got, you know, you're aware of it, and the cost is negligible to repair them. So we're trying to push things, but it's
I mean, how official is this? So
well, things like that, you know, I don't think that won't matter from the building control perspective, because the building won't fall down and it won't leak. But visually, it may not meet the client. The client will want a warranty on everything. And so the warranties is what the challenge is. So it is a challenge for sure. Yeah, and always there's a carbon impact. You know, often when something's experimental, somebody's saying, well, why don't we just build a concrete frame in addition to this, or put more steel in, and those things are frustrating. I'm always trying to find engineers who are willing to have a slightly lower, you know, safety factor on things. Why do we need 3 times the performance, or those kind of things? So, yeah.
it's very exciting times. A lot of traditional techniques and materials are coming back these days, like the new Stone Age. So it was a real stone, not just as a cladding, but structure stone. Huh? I guess you have a big part to play in that.
Yeah, well, now our buildings. I mean, that's why I titled the lecture of Earth and Culture, because for me, they're using heavier, massive materials like natural stone. The carbon of stone is so low compared to concrete, and we have an abundance of it. So exactly. So yes, we do need to get it, extract it from the earth. We do need to sometimes strengthen it, but there's an opportunity. And I think, I mean, in London there is a real renaissance for sure of masonry buildings. So yeah. Great. Any final thoughts, final questions? Yes. Sorry? Oh yeah, really good. Yeah, a really excellent relationship. So it's a good question. So I think someone perhaps a bit like 6A or somebody like that. But I'll have a think. There's some really good, or somebody really radical like Assemble, who are doing as many art projects as they are kind of architecture, but they are all public, so they might be more interesting. And they're a collective. They're a really interesting, unusual setup. So they're completely the opposite of a traditional practice like us. So maybe someone like that. Yeah, that could be quite interesting. Yeah.
Yes, and Tom Emerson was our invited lecturer 10 years ago.
Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah, so Tom was my third-year tutor.
You can find it in the doctoral school YouTube channel, this amazing lecture.
Yeah.
So I think we're out of time. Thank you very much for your lecture. And I would like to mention one thing, because tomorrow we will organize a midterm crit session for the third semester students. And we asked Fergus to be part of the teacher team or try to help us to form opinion about 10 selected plan.
Great.
And it will be from 9 until approximately 11 in the room number 277. So who are interested in, welcome and be part as audience here in this event.
Great.
So thank you very much, Fergus.
Well, thank you.
Your inspiring lecture, and I think this question and answer session was very interesting.
Great, thank you.